These are the three main questions we're seeing people asking in the wake of the historic UFO hearing that we just had in the House Oversight Committee. Who has access to the UFO evidence? When will the public be able to view this evidence? And where do we go from here? While question 2 is still up for debate while we await Congress to complete their proposed legislation upon their return from August recess, we do have some good answers for questions 1 and 3. Okay, if you follow my channel, I've done a ton of background on how we got to where we are today, so check those out. I'm going to jump right in. As we know, one of the main allegations from UFO whistleblower David Grush is that over a 4-year period, while he was working for the NGA and the NRO and a part of the UAP task force, he interviewed 40 first-hand witnesses that were inside the U.S. government's UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. As a result of his investigation, David Grush alleges that he was retaliated against in the form of his security clearance being revoked. He subsequently filed 2 whistleblower complaints because of this retaliation, as well as the underlying illegal behavior of withholding these crash retrieval programs from congressional oversight. Those 2 whistleblower complaints, one was filed with the DoD, the Department of Defense Inspector General. The other was filed with the Intelligence Community Inspector General. This gentleman, Thomas Mannheim, is the current Intelligence Community Inspector General, ICIG. He is the one who received David Grush's whistleblower complaint. Now, it's important to remember that there are 2 aspects to David Grush's complaint. One aspect was that he was retaliated against for trying to come forward, and the second aspect was that he had uncovered illegal activity in the form of the withholding of classified information from Congress. It is important to separate these 2 complaints because in order to properly file a whistleblower complaint, you need to be a first-hand witness. And while David Grush was a first-hand witness for the retaliation, he was not a first-hand witness for the withholding of classified information. As a result, Thomas Mannheim had to interview an unknown portion of the 40 witnesses that were a part of David Grush's whistleblower complaint. The current estimate is that the number of people interviewed were anywhere between 2 and 6. Those first-hand witnesses had to provide sworn testimony to Thomas Mannheim, and as a result of that sworn testimony, Mannheim deemed Grush's complaint credible and urgent, which required him to submit the underlying information and testimony from David Grush, as well as those additional first-hand witnesses, to the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, as well as the Intel committees within the House and the Senate. And included in the information forwarded to the DNI and both Intel committees was the underlying data that supported those sworn testimonies. So going back to our questions, the number one person that is the most valuable for us to have testify in front of Congress to move the conversation forward, that has been given access to the underlying evidence and based on his professional judgment deemed that underlying evidence to be credible and urgent, is Thomas Mannheim. So now we know who is best placed to speak to the underlying evidence, but Thomas Mannheim is not alone. In December of 2022, after Mannheim forwarded the underlying information to both Intel committees, both of those committees, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, both held multi-hour-long briefings with David Grush. So in addition to Thomas Mannheim, who's the ICIG, there are also 25 other people that have received classified briefings at the TSSCI level with David Grush. Those 25 people had those briefings with Grush in December of 2022. 20 of those people were in the House Intel Committee briefing that lasted for 4 hours. That included some committee lawyers, as well as an IG representative and other staffers. In the Senate Intel Committee, it was 5 people, including a court reporter and 2 committee lawyers, as well as an IG representative. So there are now a lot of people that have seen the underlying classified information that David Grush originally brought to the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, who then interviewed first-hand whistleblowers who are working inside the program. So we've briefly touched on question 1, who has access to the evidence? So let's move to question 3, what happens next? The greatest tool that the public has right now as it pertains to UFO disclosure is congressional hearings. Now, in the legislative branch, we have 2 chambers, the House and the Senate. Within each of those chambers, there are several committees and subcommittees that are focused on particular issues. While the most recent hearing was in the House Oversight Committee, and 2 out of the 3 UFO hearings we've had in the last 2 years have taken place in the House, the Senate is likely better suited to address this conversation moving forward, and specifically by way of the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee. Behind me is the full list of Senate committees, and you can see the 2 that we care about. Armed Services, towards the top, is currently chaired by Democrat Jack Reed of Rhode Island, and Intel is currently chaired by Democrat Mark Warner of Virginia. So some committees within the House and the Senate are further broken down into subcommittees. In the context of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the subcommittee that would hold a hearing related to UFOs would be the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities. Now this is where you come in. We are currently in the August recess for Congress. That means all the members of the Senate and the House are currently in their home districts until the second week of September. The whole goal of recess is to give them a break, not that they need it, and to also give them the opportunity to connect with their constituents locally and find out what's important. So I bring this note up because this list of members in the Senate Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities are the list of people in Congress we need to be emailing, calling, or sending physical letters to tell them they need to bring Thomas Mannheim, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, forward to testify to the allegations that David Grush has brought forward that the U.S. government, by way of the executive branch, is currently operating a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program for UAP and not reading in Congress. The other list of members who we should be reaching out to expressing the desire to have Thomas Mannheim testify in front of their committee is the Senate Intel Committee, including these members. So, if you live in any of these states where you have a member on the Armed Services Committee or on the Intel Committee, and you see your state or a name that you recognize, I'm going to show you a script that you can use to call or to email to request that they get Thomas Mannheim to testify. So this is a super basic script that you can use as a reference or in whole. It outlines the situation, it references what other senators are looking at the issue, and makes the specific request to get Thomas Mannheim, the ICIG, to testify in front of either of the 2 committees. Just be sure to change to either the Armed Services Committee or the Intelligence Committee, depending on who you're contacting. And there are going to be 3 ways for you to contact your senators right now because we're in August recess. Many of them are going to be hosting in-person events. So your best option is to go to an in-person event if you can and bring it up to them. The second best option is to phone call, and the third best option is email. If you do reach out via any of those 3 channels, please add a comment. We'd love to know who you contacted, when it happened, and if they said anything interesting.